So welcome everybody. We'll go ahead and get today's program started. This is our second site conversation featuring artists who are nominated for the Medium Photo Second Site Award. There are three artists who are joining us today. Each of them were participants in the 2021 Medium Review, our portfolio review. And they include Stacy Arezou Mehrfar, Nahatan Navarro, and Alex Turner. We're recording this presentation and we will upload it to our website after the conclusion of today's event. If you are interested in attending the next Medium Review, that's going to take place in February of 2022. We'll go ahead and link to that in the chat. It's planned as an in-person event in San Diego, of course, powers that be willing. I want to thank Jeff Phillips from Filter Photo in Chicago, who's going to be monitoring the chat and assisting with the Q&A for today's presentation. And I also want to acknowledge that we are broadcasting from unceded lands of the Kumeyaay people, who continue to occupy the San Diego and Tijuana region, contributing their culture, their stories, and their art. So I want to thank the Kumeyaay people for sharing your beautiful home with all of us. Today's program will be led by short presentations from each artist, followed by conversation and questions with Ann Kelly of Photo Eye Gallery in Santa Fe. You are welcome and encouraged to use the chat to pose questions, which we will answer after the conclusion of each artist's talk. I should also remind you that the artists were selected from among the participants in our 2021 portfolio review. And these are based on nominations from the participating reviewers. The Second Site Award is an annual award that we give out through Medium Photo to one artist each year, who then presents a lecture about their work and produces a limited edition fine print for Medium Photo's F16 and patron level members. One final reminder before we get started today is to keep your microphones muted and your cameras turned off during the presentations. It'll just help all of us focus. Let's see here. Oops. Sorry about that. Okay, we'll begin today with the work of Stacy Arezou Mehrfar, an artist based in New York City. Stacy's practice addresses issues related to community and looks closely at the relationship between the individual and the collective and how the related landscape shapes our identity. Her photographs, video installations, and photo books explore themes of place and belonging, interconnection, transformation, and fragility. Stacy's second photo book, called The Moon Belongs to Everyone, was published by GOST in May of 2021 and reflects upon the loss of roots in the wake of immigration. Her book is here, and Stacy is going to go ahead and talk about that. I have the privilege of spending time with it over the last few days, and it's really remarkable. So I put in a plug for that. Stacy's current work is called Untitled, Mostly We Found Life, and is a collaboration with her children, which began as a response to being quarantined in their two-bedroom apartment in Manhattan. The photographs emphasize a path to healing and offered renewed hope through kinship with the environment. Stacy was nominated by the following nominators: Ali Hoisline from Pier 24, Gregory Harris, Bree Lamb, and Ashley Lum, an independent curator from Los Angeles. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn the stage over to Stacy Merfar. Let's see.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening. I am going to share my screen and hope that it works. How does that look?
Looks great.
Excellent. Okay, so again, hello everyone, and thank you to the Medium reviewers who nominated me for the Second Site Award, and to Scott Davis and Medium as an organization for creating this platform for this evening. It's a privilege to share my work with this community. Today, I'm going to speak specifically about my most recent completed body of work entitled The Moon Belongs to Everyone. The photo book was published by Goss Books London in May, and so I thought rather than go through a slideshow presentation of the individual images, I'd share a flip through video of the entire book. I'm hoping this will not only be a visually interesting way to interact on this online format we've all grown to love, but that it would also give a good sense of how the book functions as an artwork in and of itself. Okay, so I need to press play. Is that working for everybody? Yes? Okay. After we immigrate, we feel out of bounds. The grounds we walk on in these new lands seem peculiar at best. Irrespective of borders and nationalities, when we move home, it feels as if we are in a constant state of flux, seemingly floating between spaces. As immigrants, we lose a relation to place. I left New York just after my 30th birthday. In Sydney, the oddly shaped trees, the intense yellow sun, and the red earth tones were enchanting. Well, at first, anyway. Soon, though, that novelty wore off and the distance seeped in. I couldn't quite grasp the strange new land I had found myself in. Even my native English didn't match up, as I had to relearn gestures and phrases. They literally carried different meanings. The same word would carry different meanings in Australia. I found that I was in this limbo state, and home became a place that I could only describe as being between here and there. After some time in living in Australia, I began harboring overwhelming feelings of loss. In hindsight, I now understand I was grieving. I pictured through these emotions, photographing my everyday, and The Moon Belongs to Everyone took shape organically from there. After a decade of living abroad, I unexpectedly moved back to New York, which is where I am now. And at first, I assumed that the project would end. After all, I had moved back to my proverbial homeland. But surprisingly, those same feelings of estrangement reemerged. It was as if I was a foreigner, even though I was back on my home turf. This was back in 2016. I continued to photograph through to 2020, keenly aware that the connotations of the term immigrant were changing rapidly worldwide. These photographs were made in both New York State and all through the East Coast of Australia. The localities are not really of any importance, except for the fact that they were the two places that I was living in between. And in terms of how the project functions, it was the convergence of these two very different environments that allowed me to create a sort of other space that would only exist within the world of The Moon Belongs to Everyone. In my practice, I often look at the function or the role of landscape and place in the formation of identity. In the making of this work, I approach place as a crossroads between origin and destination. And to pull this off, it was important that the landscapes would furnish no signifiers or no specificity of location. I was interested in making pictures that confused day and night, down and up and there and here. I was interested in making landscape photographs that were reminiscent of everywhere and nowhere at once. Still lifes and color fields stand in for collective memory. The color fields that appear throughout the photographs, the close-up portraits present, the color fields are photographs that appear throughout. My son just walked in and took over my, distracted me a bit. The close-up portraits present immigrants who are both alone and together in indeterminate backgrounds. Viewed in succession, they are expressive of universal emotion. And I also think of them as a community not defined by borders. The photo book is not just a collection of my most successful pictures. The pictures work together to create meaning. The narrative is nonlinear and sequence functions like a musical score, whereby the arrangements of color and pattern and figure are presented in such a way that they carry tempo and rhythm throughout each section. The black and white photographs are printed with silver ink on black paper, and for me, they seem to recede and come forward simultaneously. I wanted the images to be full bleed spreads, as I wanted the book to function like a universe in and of itself. So you open it and you enter this particular space, much like one would when they watched a film, that you would experience the world that the film presented to you. I don't want your eyes to wander. I want you to feel enveloped by the work, that you too feel a sense of being caught in this strange land. And then at the end of the book, there is a poem that I wrote to accompany it. And so I thought I would read it for you, and I put it here so that you could read along with me. Immigrant, who, you, me, they, us? Weren't those stories our grandparents? My parents did it too, somehow different, borders more disparate, almost like time travel to shift place to place. Assimilation never spoke of the earth, but one must seep into it nonetheless. Me, they, us, we all see I. Once you arrive, are you them? Do they become us? Amorphous, impalpable identities, being, belonging, she, he, me, ours, yours, mine, even though we, they, me, he, she, our collective pasts differ. The webs we extend onto dirt that came here from somewhere too. Standing here now can hardly feel there anymore. Climbing in search of anchors, here, there, was, is, thousands of layers between land and sky. Warm yellow sun radiates as before, the hour moonlight envelops sleeping forms. Eyes sting, blinking, coasting in limbo, like an ocean wave comes from there, but never really ends any place. Crashing and relinquishing its position, change made sense in the beginning. Once you migrate your eyes, you see differently. Emigrate and smells seem stranger, but the juice of a golden orange can be sweet and sour wherever the season. Lime green appears wholesome. In distance, memories transform, become odd and unfamiliar. The place between here and there. Thank you.
Beautiful book, Stacy.
Thank you.
Anne. Thank you.
So as I understand it, is it true that you worked in film prior to still photography?
Yes, I studied filmmaking in college, and when I moved back to New York, I worked as assistant camera on independent films. And also I worked for a documentarian. I did a bunch of different freelance things to kind of figure out what I wanted to do, but I did plan on being a cinematographer.
I think that makes a lot of sense in looking at your still photography, just in the way that you pair different types of imagery that might not otherwise really be easy to pair or wouldn't flow and in as fluid of a way as it does. Would you agree with that, Scott?
I do. Yeah, I didn't know that actually about your background, Stacy. So it is a really interesting element to add to it. I was curious, in spending time with the book, I mean, I kind of want to give a plug for it because I've had the privilege of sitting with it. You mentioned the metallic ink, or maybe it's metallic paper, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's black paper with silver ink.
Okay. What led to that choice?
That's quite complicated and kind of bit of history. When I moved back to New York, I went to APAD, and Gost had a table there, and they had just published a book called Nowhere Far by a British photographer named Nicholas Hughes. And the book is stunning. And in that book, there's different types of papers used, and inks, and one of the sections is like a navy blue paper with gold ink. Another section is with silver ink, and then there's color. And I fell in love with that book, and I really fell in love with Gost's work at seeing all the books that they produced, and that's kind of what sparked it, and how I started to think about making the black and white images printed that way.
The other thing that I was really taken with when I was able to sit down with the book and spend time with it is the inclusion of these color fields in it. And I know you and I talked about that briefly, and you mentioned it also in your talk, but I found that was a really it was the sort of visceral experience that you get by sitting with an object that was hard to even feel looking through the video of it that you presented, right? And of course, this is the joy of living with objects and having books, is that you get these kinds of experiences. But that that shift of these colors and the related photographs that would precede it or come after it really was an amazing emotional experience to turn through those. It was just, that was one of the unexpected delights for me.
I love that. Thank you. I can give you some of the background of the color fields. So actually, those are the first pictures I made and some of the only ones that are on film. When I moved to Sydney, and started, as I said in that little talk that I gave, that I started out by photographing my everyday. My son was 3 months old, and so I would go on walks with him in the stroller. Sometimes we would drive to different parts of Sydney and walk around. And I became obsessed with the color of the flowers on the trees in Sydney, because those flowers don't exist in New York. And if they do, they're only in a florist, and like a really fancy florist, they're not normal. And it's not normal to see those colors in nature for me. So I started to think about how color triggers memory. And, we think about smells with memory, but what about color? And so I started to photograph them, and then I became really interested in photography and how color is so subjective anyway. And so that takes us on a whole other tangent. But then in the book, I brought them back when I was working on the edit and sequence and like deciding how to finish the project. I brought them back for that reason, because I wanted them to create emotional kind of, what's the word? Like striking moments for the viewer when they're going through the book.
Do you have any questions? Oh, go ahead. From participants, I was going to ask. But
yeah. I just have a question. In terms of exhibitions versus book, do you see your work as a book before an exhibition, or vice versa?
The work was originally an 8-channel video installation, and then it became a book. So I am really interested in playing with form. And so I don't see it as one or the other. I see it as, how can I push these ways of telling my story, and how can I tell my story using what's available to me in a way. So I really want to do an exhibition of this work. It hasn't come to pass yet. I haven't really pushed it as much as I probably should. But I'm curious myself to make prints of the work and to see how it functions within a gallery space.
Mm-hmm. Well,
how do you see it?
It certainly makes a beautiful book. I don't know. I just talked to a lot of photographers, as you might imagine, and a lot of times it seems like the exhibition is the first thing in mind, but you kind of, based upon the book that you've recently produced, you kind of strike me as someone that sees it as a book first, just in terms of the way you're interacting with it.
Yeah, I think that's true. After I made the videos, I was like, okay, now I want to make the book of this work. Mm-hmm. And now I want to make the exhibition of the work. Like I said, I don't think about individual photographs very often, although at the moment that's what I'm working on. I'm shifting gears, but I traditionally think about it as the project in and of itself, or as a whole, and how to portray those feelings or those ideas, and what's the best way to do that. And yeah, so I don't think of it as one before the other necessarily, but how can I do this?
Sure. But I think just your thought process of the images and how they interact with each other, and the certain sequence is kind of, I don't know, there's something within the book that you have a little more control over that aspect of it.
Right. That is true.
Well, we've put a link to the book, specifically to your webpage that has that link, as well as the book link in it, Stacy, so that people can go ahead and surf over there, pick up a copy for themselves. I encourage you to do so. It's worthwhile, to put it mildly.
Thank you.
I should have mentioned also that you can use the raise hand feature as well if you prefer to speak questions as we go on through the rest of the presentation today. I'm going to go ahead and welcome our next speaker, Nahatan Navarro.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Nahatan, welcome. I'll give a quick introduction for Nahatan. As you can see on the screen, he's based in Hermosillo, Sonora, in the state of Sonora, I should say, in Mexico. His work has focused on spaces found within abandoned buildings, and specifically on the people who call these places home. Through compassionate approaches to each individual, he has created a record of their being, showing their marks, their scars, and the spirit carried by these people who might otherwise be invisible to the outside world. Nahatan was nominated for the Second Sight Award by Peggy Sue Amison, Bree Lamb, Doug Marshall at Marshall Contemporary in Los Angeles, and Mary Virginia Swanson in Tucson, Arizona. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn the presentation over to you, Naha, and we'll take it from there.
Okay. Do you have the presentation, or I can start to talking about?
Yeah, if you do, you want to go ahead and start that? I can pull it up if you need, but I was under the impression you would go ahead and run it.
Okay, okay.
Whichever you prefer.
Okay, I can wait for the presentation if
Okay.
you have the photograph. Or...
Sure, hang on.
Perfect.
And Naha, while I'm pulling that up, why don't you go ahead and share in your own words a little bit about your background, both in photography and the work that we're going to see.
Okay. If you want, I can start talking about my two long project photograph. The first of them are Those Who Stay. It's the project you are talking about a few seconds ago, and it's about two phenomena, migration and homeless people here in Hermosillo, Sonora, and how they can stay together in just one point and just can stay there. If you want, I can share my screen. I don't know, and see the photograph. Maybe it's a little bit more easy for us to talk about it. Yeah. Do you can under?
Naha, I'll have your presentation up in just about 15 seconds.
Okay, perfect, perfect. So in first plane, my intention are see how the future and the past in two different social phenomena can stay together. So here in Mexico, the migration, it's so close to the work future, and how the people are moving for work, for have a better future and stay, do something. And for other part, the homeless people are chained to the work past. So maybe they do something wrong, maybe they take bad choices, and that's the reason why they are in homeless situation. So for me, are too interesting how two phenomena can stay in two different times. So I try to take photographs about it, and to me are so interesting, the people and what's the reason for they are moving. Yeah, is a little bit of there. So in my first intentions, the portrayals are so important, but with the pass of the time, the portrayals pass to the second plane to me, and I stay so interesting in the places and how the places can tell so much about the people who stay there and how the people interaction with building and the building stay in the people in few ways. So I try to do a little bit stop motions and light and short videos about it. And you can see them, they are so close with the buildings and the places. So to me are more important that and take these little details with the time are forget for all the people. The buildings can go down, and so many times we don't have idea what they do there and what can they compete with the buildings and data spaces and how important can be for these people. So the places and the portraits start to are so close, one of them one with the others. So I'm trying to take both of them, and sometimes to me are more important the places and can say more than the portraits. So I try to to stay in the balance with the portraits and the photograph of that buildings. And my second project go a little bit more beyond and try to get the context of the people who can stay in USA and go there and work and what's wait for them in the other side of the border. And so many times it's so different. So to me are more important the context of the place when they come. And I can ask Mark. Sometimes it's just seconds, and other times can stay 2-3 years with that people in different moments of the work. But sometimes it's just seconds, like in the second project. But in the first project, I stay maybe years with my pulse there. I don't know if another question here. It's for Mark Sloven. But yes, it's so important get confidence with them and they stay comfortable with my camera and me. So the reality is can be just seconds with them or stay a few years in different moments. And the second one, the more life than years, Ice in the Mist. It's different. It's in USA, and all the work it's more about the context of the people than the other things. To me, in that moment, it's not interesting. Take photograph about my pals and my co-workers in USA. It's not interesting to me. Take photograph about the migrant in USA, but the context, the places, the faces when we come there and try to stay and do something, it's more impressive and take more relevance for my for my project. I don't know if I can tell them right. But it's a reality. To me, it's more important that than the other people with me. I don't know if have more questions, or if you, Scott or Anne, have something for tell.
I'm wondering if you can talk about what initially drew you to enter this space, and if it's a singular space where you were making these photographs, or if it's a series of abandoned buildings.
The more percentage of the photograph are doing in the same place, but it's another 2 or 3 places too. And the first place is this one, have like 8, 10 room, big rooms, and the light are so good for portraits, and the building big can be more easy to the people to take his things and stay there and do some things and in that big places, you know. And but yes, it's like 2 or 3 different places, but it's one of their, we have more photographs in there. And this is the second one. This project is made in California and Oregon. From Mark again, yeah, to me, more in the first project, it's so important the light, because it's like a exercise to go there, stay, and wait for the light. When the light can go in to the building and the people stay there, to me it's so important. Yes, it's almost something like cinematographic for me, and I try to give them that moment to the light in the photographs. And this second project, all it's about around, all it's me like lost in that city and in this little town, and what can I see, what can I do, what can I take. It's more turn more go into me and my perspective, and it's more personal in a few ways. I don't know if I can tell them right. I mean, I live in Hermosillo, it's all desert. It's got, you know, just cactus and a little bit of snakes, and go there and it's big woods, so green. The mist, for me, it's new. It's like a big stuff. I don't know, how can I say that? And the people, it's so different, and the attitude, it's so different too. And to me, it's more important take that context and take them to the photograph and the context to the migrants.
Do you have a sense of how people respond differently to the presence of your camera in Mexico versus the United States?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a little bit unfair because my pulse here, it's for 1 time, 2 times, and the USA so many times it's a few seconds, and tell them what I am doing and why I'm taking photograph. But in both cases, I never have problems with the people. All the people are great, so nice. Even in USA, I maybe think they are like a little bit more take distance for the camera, but for luck for me, it's not the case. All the people are great and take it in the good way. So to me, it's easy talk with the people and tell them what I am doing, and almost all the time I have luck, I think.
So the work in Mexico, I think you said the people were living in abandoned cellars. Was that
Yeah.
the phrase you used? There's a lot of drawings on the walls in those locations that you featured, and I'm just curious to know a little bit more about those. Did you seek out the people that drew those? There's just quite a few of them, so it makes me wonder about those.
Yeah, so many of that draws are amazing to me. They made them when they turn fires for go out to the mosquitoes and all that stuff. The walls go black, and they take sticks, and with one stick they pass and go white again, and that's the way they paint in the walls. So to me are so awesome, because that draws, maybe you can see the scale there, but are so big, like 2 or 3 meters, like I don't know, 6, 8 feet maybe. So it's so big and have so many details. So when you go and see them in the print, you can see black, hard black, and a little bit white in that dust for the burn wood. So are very, very awesome draws. So, and to me it's so important have memories of that details to the people in that places. So.
Well, and it's interesting too. I think you're there to a certain extent to communicate with something with your camera, and the people you're photographing. That's kind of their form of, one of their forms of communication is the drawings that they're making. And you mentioned a lot of those people you knew for years, and some you only knew for seconds. But I get the sense from all the portraits I've seen that you've known them for years, even if you haven't. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a beautiful intimacy to those. And, you know, I was really taken, particularly with the portraits in Mexico, by the quality of light, you know, that you find inside these spaces. It's, you know, people throw their name Vermeer around a lot when they see striking lighting on a portrait of a person, but this definitely had that for me. And I thought it was really interesting to then see the contrast of the photographs that you made of people in the United States and how you opted for a kind of soft light in most cases. And the relationship between the two of those was really dynamic. I appreciate that. So I'm going to go ahead in the name of time and introduce our final speaker for today. We can circle back as needed with questions, if questions come up by anybody at the end of the presentation. But our final presenter is Alex Turner, who works from his home and studio in Los Angeles. Alex's work explores the technological capabilities and ethical concerns of remote sensing tools that are deployed to surveil activity along the US-Mexico border. Merging infrared and AI-generated imagery with landscape photographs, Alex collapses intimate and distanced depictions of the border landscape. And through this work, a new framework for understanding both concealed and ephemeral movement emerges, suggesting a kind of continuous circulation that's just beyond our unaided vision. Alex was nominated by Jeffrey Kozlov of Photorelevance in Houston, Douglas Marshall from Los Angeles, Jennifer Schlesinger from the Obscura Gallery in Santa Fe, and Rick Wester of Rick Wester Fine Art in New York City. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn the stage over to Alex Turner.
All right. Hello, everyone. Firstly, I want to thank Scott and Medium Photo for coordinating this, and Anne for taking the time to talk with all of us today, and all of you for tuning in. I'm pretty honored to share the virtual stage here with this group of artists tonight. I want to talk about a project I've been working on called Blind River. And I started a few years ago as a grad student at the University of Arizona. For a place that's so dry, it's been somewhat ironic that my fascination with the desert revolves around water, actually. But what's interesting is water behaves differently in the Sonoran Desert. It's certainly scarce, but I've been drawn to its more ephemeral qualities. After a rainstorm or monsoon, it can flood or violently carve washes through the desert and then disappear. It can fluctuate wildly and gouge new channels and then evaporate. But other times it seeps underground and creates hidden currents that can endure for long stretches of time. Humans and wildlife move through the Sonoran Desert similarly. In many cases, their presence is fleeting and hidden. And this is a very complex region. For starters, it's bisected by an international border. And that border and the countries on both sides have a profound influence on this landscape and the way humans and wildlife move through it. I want to start by talking about what it means to be in this space and the motives that different people and animals have for being there. Even though the border region in southern Arizona is remote, it's still very active. But most activity, both human and non-human, is fairly covert. Wildlife follow standard predator-prey tactics. Predators hide from their prey until they attack, and prey attempt to avoid being seen altogether. And one of the best ways to achieve that, both as predators and prey, is to be active at night in darkness. The Sonoran Desert in particular has a high percentage of nocturnal wildlife, in part because the competition for food and resources is so intense. But as I said earlier, wildlife is only part of the equation. There are significant parallels between human and wildlife activity in this region. Individuals move alone or in groups depending on what is safest for them. They often traverse difficult terrain or move at night in order to avoid being seen. And many of these people are from incredibly vulnerable communities, including migrants and refugees, and even drug runners. Others, like Border Patrol, militia, or hunters, assert their power and often move through the space just as covertly, but their motives are obviously much different. And then there are others yet, like myself, or scientists, or ranchers, miners, hikers, bird watchers, that move through here with an altogether different set of motives. They're usually less concerned or aware of their presence. This is a picture of me approaching one of my motion-triggered infrared cameras in the night as part of a partnership with wildlife biologists tracking migration in the region. Then there's the land itself. It's rugged and shockingly beautiful, and I have the privilege and luxury of viewing it that way. For others, it's much more formidable and deadly. But it can be hard to see both the rugged terrain and the hidden activity together, in part because making a detailed depiction of the landscape and capturing nocturnal activities require two very different imaging technologies. So I was interested in what it would look like to combine these ways of viewing a space, both the detailed landscape and the infrared captures together simultaneously. What happens when I begin to expand the frame and show you more of the landscape that these figures occupy with more detail? And thinking of this as a border environment, so far I've shown you animal and human activity separately, but they occur simultaneously in the same space. And they're both affected by each other and this political edge space in an otherwise continual natural landscape. These are two desert gray foxes on a Border Patrol access road. Which leads us to the way we look at this space. All of the footage of these figures I've shown you have come from those infrared cameras. And those cameras obviously see in ways that humans can't and collect footage continuously. So who is installing these cameras and what do they want to capture? It turns out a lot of different things. The wildlife biologists I'm working with, for one, are compiling that data to study wildlife populations and migration patterns. Hunters also install game cameras, as do ranchers, and so does Border Patrol. And just like the people captured on these cameras, those who own the cameras also have a variety of motives. But they all happen to be monitoring the same spaces with the same tools and capturing the same footage. They're all just interested in very different things. And then analyzing their footage with the same recognition technologies. And there are many different variations of these AI systems, but the premise is mostly the same. It learns to isolate subjects from their environments and then make an educated guess on what that subject is. In this case, the wildlife biology team software correctly identified this as a jaguar, although it was only 54% sure. But major tech firms have gotten involved too. Many are sharing their technologies with most anyone willing to pay for it, including government agencies. And while some attempt to downplay their involvement, others wholly embrace the politics. This comes at a time when researchers using these tools, including the wildlife biologists, are desperately trying to stay out of the political conversation. But it's impossible to ignore the parallels and the concerns. Regardless of motive, when you rely on machines to both capture and identify, you risk creating simplified or sometimes incorrect depictions of a space. And a remote sensing operation with minimal human management risks dehumanizing the subjects it captures. And this is obviously more concerning when the operation specifically targets humans. And in particular, those vulnerable people I mentioned before, such as migrants and refugees. As people are more and more turning to machines to do this kind of work for them, they interact with or think about these individuals and spaces less and less. We risk losing empathy or even basic understanding of what is happening. And so I wanted to subvert that power structure, subjecting everyone, including those doing the watching, to the same surveillance tactics, including this Border Patrol agent here. And that power structure includes me and my affiliation with an academic institution that wields considerable influence in Southern Arizona. It's important to recognize that influence, even though the biologists I'm working with aren't interested in that human data. The research that's generated by these projects will shape environmental policies throughout the border region for generations. So I want people to reflect on that power and consider the profound decisions that people in power make based on this data. And then consider the detachment. How much can we truly claim to know about a place or a subject when looking at a pixelated version of it on a screen as selected for us by an algorithm? And what happens when it's wrong? Here we have one vehicle and one human as identified by AI. And obviously that's not actually a vehicle, at least not in the literal sense of the word. But we're looking at this footage through the lens of a wildlife biologist. Whether or not their AI software correctly identifies white-tailed deer or even a human will not have an adverse effect on the people moving through here. But you see the potential danger when an error or implicit bias is built into the programming and no one is held accountable for it. But as we debate the ethical and technical dilemmas that these remote sensing and AI technologies bring to the surface, it doesn't change the fact that footage and data is being collected and analyzed at the border and around the world. So that brings me back to water and its fluidity and its ephemeral qualities, but also its accumulation. I talked about human and non-human movement along the border, reminding me of the way water moves through the region. But data accumulation today also operates much like a river. There are many ways you could look at this constant stream of information. As scientists and government agencies and tech companies compile endlessly, a lot of questions arise. For one, how often are we monitored and not even aware? What are the responsibilities of the surveillant when storing or securing this information? And who is privy to it? And what happens when individuals or groups or machines begin to extract information that they want from it? But there's also a more philosophical element to this as well. In this constant bombardment of data, you have the potential to collapse time in ways that our eyes can't see. So in this case, you have 8 captures of 2 coyotes moving through an environment over the course of a couple hours. And you can begin to visualize their route. And there are other ways you can expand on this idea. When you start layering footage on top of itself, areas of overlap create this ghostly glow, and patterns in areas of frequent passage emerge. Here we have 24 javelinas enjoying the remains of a cow carcass. So as we can begin to compile this data, individual moments like this human and deer during a 2-hour interval, they start to collapse under the slow build of activity and time. What becomes one night turns into 1 week and then 1 month. And that human and deer are now barely visible in the steady stream of movement through this space. But in addition to highlighting the frequency of passage, it also shows you how ephemeral movement in this region is. In their transparency, subjects occupy unique in-between space. Their mark endures, but their presence is fleeting. It also provides the opportunity to parse through data differently too. In addition to organizing this space based on time parameters, you could organize it based on different types of movement. So that one drug runner and his horse, labeled 1 vehicle and 1 human, is actually part of a larger system of cartel traffic. Then when you include all of the activity from that time frame, you realize there's much more happening here. In this case, a lot of cattle use this route, and coyotes apparently prefer to take a less traveled path at the bottom. So authorship of this data and the way it's curated is critical. You could generate an almost infinite number of conclusions based on how you sort through it. And so how we apply these technologies is crucial. On the US-Mexico border, we see applications on both ends of the spectrum. These tools are powerful, as are the intentions of those using them, as are the motivations of those passing through. This is a region full of complexities and contradictions. And in my time there, I can offer a contradicting thought. I'm both fearful and hopeful about how these tools are used, about how we see each other and our environment through their lenses, and how we all move through this world, both individually and together. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
So Alex, I had read that you had actually installed and maintained some of those cameras when you were living in Arizona. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I became a citizen scientist for the wildlife biology team. And so all of the footage you're seeing is actually data that's collected by them that's part of their research. But it was kind of this unique partnership where I was able to both work with the team, but also share ownership of the footage. And so I kind of occupied this unique space where I was beholden to the parameters of their research, but also had artistic license with it too. So it was a challenging and fascinating tightrope to walk.
And is that something you're still doing now that you're in LA? Do you take occasional trips out to maintain the cameras, or is that
I still have a couple cameras. And what's nice about them is, you put good batteries in them. They can keep capturing for 4 to 6 months at a time. And so I'm not, that's another thing I should mention about this is, in order to retrieve that data, you have to hike out to these cameras, some of which are in challenging remote locations to access. And so it's a bit of a project to get to some of them. But luckily, because they can store so much and last so long, you don't have to do it every couple of weeks, essentially.
Okay, wow. I had almost imagined you being able to stream that footage.
No, it's really interesting to think about because, when I was out in this space, either setting up the cameras or retrieving the data from them, I felt fully immersed in these landscapes. But then I would go home and I would, pour through the footage on my laptop, and I'm in my air-conditioned apartment, 150 miles away from where this was happening. And I felt that sense of detachment from the space that I was surveilling. And so that was almost the impetus for doing this project, was that disparity between experienced, perspective of a place versus, kind of that detached remote look at it.
And I'm curious about that term citizen scientist. You, in moving to Arizona, hadn't anticipated making this work, as I understand it. It just is one of those things that happened. But you found other citizen scientists and became one of them. I'm just curious who these other people might be. I hadn't heard that term before.
It's a lot of retirees. One of the nice things about working with a research institution like U of Arizona is that it's really easy to, essentially find out who's running a research program. In this case, I had heard about jaguars in Southern Arizona and started doing research on that, and found out that all of the research was being conducted by a team of biologists at University of Arizona. And when you're a grad student, it's really easy to just shoot an email and say you're interested in their project, and more or less they'll roll out the red carpet for you. And so I was privileged enough to have that kind of access. But they have a very robust citizen scientist program, which is, dozens and dozens of mostly retirees in Southern Arizona who want to stay involved with a group like this, and do hikes out to cameras and work with the community. And so it's a really interesting group to be a part of, because everyone is very invested in the work.
And you had told a story about, I think, the first time you saw yourself on camera, you were identified as 78% human, and that had kind of an impact on you.
Yeah, it was while I was doing this project, the biology team was developing this AI software for this purpose. I mean, these cameras capture thousands and thousands and thousands of pictures, and someone has to go through there and label every single one of them and log it in a database. And so they're hoping to cut down on, a significant amount of time. And for the most part, I was a test subject for them, and they wanted to give me access to this program and start running my footage through it and see what happened. And I didn't really think about how that could be applied to the project I was interested in making until I ran a picture of myself through it as a test. And it was very, very disquieting when I saw this, green, very sterile clinical box placed around me, and it just said human 78%. It completely changed the entire scope of this project. And I started to think about, like I was saying, that dehumanizing and detachment element to this type of work. And I started thinking in a, larger scale about what surveillance and data collection looks like today.
How, if would you say, did that visually change the project for you, that moment?
It did. I mean, as you can see with some of the work, that element isn't included. And so there's this more ethereal quality to some of the work. And I kind of like that juxtaposition of, like I said, the ethereal pictures, and then having that, clinical neon green box thrown in there that kind of, hopefully throws the viewer off a little bit and makes them kind of reconsider what they're looking at.
Well, Alex, before we wrap up this evening, there's a couple of questions that I wanted to share about what you might envision beyond this work, if indeed you're at a point to think beyond it. It might just be ongoing. Yeah, just to elaborate on that.
Yeah, I'm I'm going to have a solo exhibition starting later this month in New York. Details about that will be forthcoming. But I was thinking a lot about the question Stacy was asked earlier about, did you envision this as a book or as an exhibition? Did one come first or was one prioritized? And I guess I'd always kind of pictured this being an exhibition, in part because the scale of the work. And one thing I didn't really talk about with this was these are incredibly detailed, high resolution pictures that can be blown up very, very large. And the point of that is for the viewer to feel immersed in these landscapes. And so I always pictured them being, large prints on a wall. But I do think it lends itself to a book form, although I think it would have to be restructured a bit. But I'm interested in, especially towards the end of my talk there, I talked about this layering and accumulation. And I think flipping the pages of a book would allow the viewer to kind of see that layering and that progression and accumulation in a really interesting way. And so, yeah, over the next couple months, I've begun thinking about what this could look like in different forms, specifically book form.
That's great. Thank you very much, Alex. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and to let you know that the next iteration of the Second Sight conversation will be held on September 23rd. This is going to be with Lisa Hostetler, Christus Valbonis, and Ann Vetter. There's information about that on the Medium Photo website, and there's also information about the next Medium review, the portfolio review that we host every year. That will be in February of 2022, so you can find information if you're interested in joining us for that. I do want to give thanks again to each of the presenters today, Alex, Nahatan, and Stacy, and special thanks to Anne for joining us from Photo Eye Gallery in Santa Fe, and also for Jeff Phillips from Filter Photo for helping make this a success today. I appreciate all of your time. I'm really happy to see the comments, and we'll look forward to seeing all of you in a future iteration. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott and Alex. Stacy, thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah, that was
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Thanks, everybody. It was fun.
Yeah. Have a wonderful night wherever you are in the country, or whichever country you're in. I know there's many people joining us from Mexico today as well. So thank you all. It's been a wonderful experience. Take care.
Bye.